PAC member Arroyo. PAC member Allstrand.
Here.
And thank you. Our first order of business prior to convening as the PAC will be a presentation and an action item on the Regional Housing Trust Fund.
Yeah, I'll kick off the presentation. Good afternoon, everybody. This is Executive Director Burks. This item is coming before you because it's really kind of twofold. One is mainly to share information about local efforts to form a regional housing trust fund, share information about what that fund would look like and be, and also seek direction from the board about the desire to have HCOG actively participating in the formation of that type of fund and potentially even be considered as the administrator. We have Elizabeth Connor here tonight. Elizabeth is the former executive director of Humboldt Bay Housing Development Corporation. She recently completed a regional housing trust fund feasibility study for the County of Humboldt's Department of Health and Human Services Department, and also is working with the Redwood Region Economic Development Commission on advancing the conversation regarding a regional housing trust fund. So she'll go into a little bit more about what that fund could look like. I wanted to kind of share how it relates to HCOG and how we kind of got in the process of talking about it. So I want to cover a little bit about HCOG's relationship to housing. For many, many years, we've had the RHNA responsibilities, which is the Regional Housing Needs Allocation Process. We do that about once every 7 years, and that's where we get the numbers from the state that tell us how much housing we need, and we work with all of our jurisdictions to divvy up those numbers that go into the housing element. So that's one way we're already involved in housing. And I think more to the point of how we kind of got on this topic and interested in the Regional Housing Trust Fund is administering the REAP 1.0 grant, which we started, I think, back in 2020, and really for the first time had funding associated with housing policies that HCOG was administering. And we are still in the process of administering those REAP 1.0 funds. And it puts us in the center, or at least involved in a lot of discussions regionally related to housing. And then we did, as you're aware, we're successful in the REAP 2.0 grant, which for the first time we've directly supported through grant funding an infill housing project, which is the We Are Up project in McKinleyville. And it's, I think partly the reason we did that was because it meets, it's in a location being infill that meets our transportation priorities. And then as you'll hear in Elizabeth's presentation, some of the research she's been doing, HCOG has come up through her interviews and other discussions as an entity that could possibly manage this fund. I think it really speaks to kind of the composition of HCOG and the trust that people have, being that all jurisdictions are represented here. And so it's kind of organically come up. And my answer when I'm in meetings and this comes up is I say, we are, I'd be happy to talk further, but I really need some direction from my board. So today is that day where I'd like to, one, make sure you're aware of this effort going on and also get some direction. Is this something you'd like me to continue being involved in? And it's also, is it something you're willing to consider having HCOG eventually administer a fund like this? It would be a lot of changes. There'd be a lot more decision points as we go along. But this is just that first preliminary direction. Should we kind of keep our name in the hat as an organization that would be willing to host this fund and see the benefits for our region? And I'm going to stop my talk there. I'm going to turn it over to Elizabeth, who can, really is going to outline, what the funds can be used for, how they work a little bit more, very high level overview. Then I'll do a little bit of closing, and then we'll be happy to take questions.
Is this working? Okay, good. Thank you for that introduction, Beth, and thank you for the opportunity to present. As you all know, the shortage of housing, especially affordable housing, is acute right now. It's leading to higher home prices, higher rents, and an increase in homelessness. This is not only a tragedy for the people that are paying too much for their housing costs, leaving too little for medical care and food, but it's also a significant drag on our local economy and on our economic development efforts. Last May, the Eureka Chamber of Commerce conducted a survey of their members. 54% stated that their employees struggled to find adequate affordable housing. 49% said housing issues made staffing their businesses or organizations more difficult. and yet we have new industries also coming in. So housing trust funds, sometimes called affordable housing trust funds, are one of the tools in the toolbox to create more affordable housing in Humboldt County. So what are housing trust funds? Housing trust funds are distinct funds established by cities and counties to provide dedicated, ongoing public revenue to support the development and preservation of affordable housing. Let me break that down for you. So the funds are in trust and dedicated to affordable housing and can only be used for that purpose. They can't be taken out like the general fund or city budgets. They must be used for that purpose. Housing trust funds support affordable housing in communities by providing grants and loans, and they're serving those housing needs that are usually unmet by state and federal grants. And I'll say more about that later. And they're often used to fill gaps that make a project go. Housing trust funds are funded by identified sources of public funds or fees, some of which must be ongoing funds. They can also be funded by many other sources, including one-time payments and private donations. So housing trust funds are used to address the specific affordable housing needs of local jurisdictions without much state or federal intervention beyond them setting some general use guidelines, some general income guidelines, and when needed, some length of affordability requirements. And because these trust funds are designed without state and federal intervention, they're more flexible than almost any other source of funding for housing, and I'll talk about that more. And so it will allow us to produce more affordable housing, and that's why more jurisdictions throughout the country and throughout the state are forming trust funds. In California, housing trust funds are eligible to receive a 1-to-1 state match for any funds that we raise locally. So, what types of programs and activities do housing trust funds fund? First, to go back to the point, a lot of housing trust funds don't necessarily or even usually offer big pots of money to different projects. In fact, it's a compilation of it's a sort of putting together of a bunch of percentage of small fees and stuff that adds up, and sometimes large donations. But rather, housing trust funds really offer gap financing. So for example, say, you can offer a loan to fill the void between, say, a senior lender, a developer equity, and the tax credits and other sources of funding. The ability to have the flexible gap financing with low interest loans means you also can leverage other funding and help make the whole project go. Additionally, and important for our locality, low interest deferred pre-development loans to nonprofits and small local developers allow them to conduct the studies, that pre-development studies that are needed to get the large grants. So this is a source for that. And it'll increase the productions of units and also increase the production of units by adding more nonprofits and small developers to our mix in Humboldt County. And by the way, my interest and passion in in housing trust funds began when I was executive director of Humboldt Bay Housing, the nonprofit affordable housing developer. There were too many times it took us too long or cost us too much to get the grant to have a large project, and the projects died. And so when I discovered housing trust funds and the ability to get this, I became very passionate about it and still am. So just to give you an idea, here are some of the most common programs and activities that are funded by housing trust funds in California. New construction, pre-development, rehabilitation of homes of low-income households. It's really important to preserve housing and not lose it. Provide match for state and federal grants. Emergency repairs. Hard not to think of Rio Del. Accessibility upgrades. First-time home purchase or down payment assistance. Supportive housing, transitional housing, or homeless shelters. And along with determining what activities to fund, each housing trust fund needs to determine the income group that it wants to target. And each one can be slightly different. And by the way, there's been an interesting change in state law related to housing trust funds recently, which is that right now, up to 20% of housing trust fund funds can be used for moderate income, meaning 80 to 120%. They may use it for that, and 30% must be used for low income. The moderate income was put in case local housing trust funds or regional want to address workforce housing. And so that's good. So what are the revenue sources? Well, there's nearly 100 different revenue sources that have been dedicated to housing trusts throughout the United States, and 60 that are most commonly used in California. As I said, small amounts contributed regularly add up and become the fund. So the ongoing revenues most commonly committed to housing trust funds in California are a percentage of real estate transfer taxes or document recording fees, percentage of our TOT tax, percentage of short-term rental tax, and many jurisdictions are adding an affordable housing fee to the short-term rentals. Inclusionary zoning or other in lieu fees, unclaimed utility deposits, interest from rainy day funds, small percentage of a general fund. And importantly, jurisdictions may also now use their permanent local housing allocation or PLHA funds as the match to contribute to housing trust funds. Okay, so that was my quick overview on housing trust funds, which again are distinct accounts that receive dedicated sources of public funds to support affordable housing. Here's a few other relevant points about housing trust funds. Housing trust funds can be either local or regional. In California, there's more local, but more and more regional are forming, and that's partly because the laws are changing to make it more advantageous because the state wants to encourage building of housing. A single jurisdiction may set up a local housing trust fund and also participate in a regional housing trust fund, and both funds will be matched by the state. Currently, the city of Eureka and the county of Humboldt are in the process of setting up local housing trust funds, and their staff are also both interested in proceeding with the regional housing trust fund. And also, housing trust funds, whether regional or local, can be run by a public agency or JPA, or it can be set up as a public-private partnership. So any jurisdiction can decide to set up a local housing trust fund. 2 of our jurisdictions are already in progress, but there would be many benefits to forming a regional housing trust fund in Humboldt County. Here's a few of them. A regional housing trust fund is eligible for more match funds from HCD. It's about double. A regional housing trust fund would create one set of administration instead of 4 to 6 separate ones, which would allow more funds to go to housing and less to administration. Smaller jurisdictions are significantly more likely to participate in a housing trust fund if a regional housing trust fund, because lack of staff capacity would really prevent them from setting up a local housing trust fund. All participating jurisdictions can contribute their permanent local allocation, housing allocation funds, which together will add up to a much more impactful amount, and will make sure that they're used locally and don't have to be returned to the state, which is what happens if you don't use them. Each funding cycle, in line with the overall priorities of the fund, a regional housing trust fund could loan or grant to the jurisdictions with the project or projects most ready to go. This will increase affordable housing development in our county. And just overall, our jurisdictions are so small. And when you add up the whole population of the county, we're 1/10 of a lot of cities that have local housing trust funds. And so to me, it makes a lot of sense to take a regional approach. Combining our pots of affordable housing funds will provide more flexibility and increase our overall capacity. Okay, so understanding these benefits and wanting to move the idea forward, and with funding and support from the Department of Health and Human Services, in late 2002 and early 2003, I conducted interviews with planning and/or city management staff of almost all local jurisdictions to assess interest and to identify obstacles and issues. Additionally, I interviewed staff from potential partners or administrators, and including the Housing Authority, HCOG, and the Humboldt Area Foundation Wild Rivers Fund. And lastly, I presented to and received feedback from several individuals, elected officials, and groups about the Regional Housing Trust Fund to get input from a variety of stakeholders. So a brief summary of the results of interview with planning or city management staff. There was a lot of interest, and all said they would be at a minimum interested in further discussions, and there were no hard no's. There weren't even soft no's. The smaller jurisdictions stated they did not have the capacity to form a local housing trust fund. Several expressed concern that about having the housing trust fund led by a single jurisdiction and preferred that it would not be. The interest in participating increased with the understanding that the permanent local housing allocation funds could be provided as a local match and then also matched by the state again. The interest went up further. And, you know, I conducted interviews like this with these jurisdictions about 12 years ago. And I will say that there was a heck of a lot more openness this time and receptivity in the concept of regional trust. The difference is likely based on the acuteness of the housing shortage, the increase in the homeless population, and positive experiences with affordable housing development in several small communities. The summary of other stakeholder input was, overall, there was a lot of support for the idea of a regional housing trust fund. Many expressed interest in having HCOG, the housing authority, or an existing organization administer a housing trust fund rather than setting up a new independent joint powers authority. And in that context, also expressed that they did not want any of the individual jurisdictions to administer the housing trust fund. Some expressed that they felt HCOG would be an ideal fit since they're already doing the regional housing needs allocation. Many felt a public-private partnership with the Humboldt Area Foundation Wild Rivers Fund could enhance the effectiveness of the project and allow us to raise greater amount of funds. The local housing authority reported that they did not have the capacity to administer a regional housing trust fund at this time, as they are undertaking development activities for the first time and don't have the staff capacity to take that on at this time. The Humboldt Area Foundation and Wild Rivers Fund are very interested in potentially partnering with us and really playing any role they can to help move this forward, and it fits in with their key priorities. So the results of these wide-ranging interest interviews and feedback sessions were positive and promising and point clearly towards moving forward with the effort to develop a housing trust fund. So these discussions and the understanding of how the lack of affordable housing negatively impacts our local economy led to funding by the Redwood Economic Development Commission to move the discussion forward, and that brings us to where we are today and the next steps. So just very briefly, the next steps to forming a housing trust fund as we see it is, along with identifying an administrative entity, the key task now is to raise funds to hire a consultant to do a regional housing trust fund feasibility study, develop a potential administrative plan, and prepare all the necessary memorandums of understanding and enabling legislation that would be required. We have several sources of potential funding identified. The funds also would be used to develop an RFP for the consultant and continue to receive stakeholder input and building support for the regional trust. And by the way, the county did apply for REAP 2 funds to fund this effort, and they did not get the grant. Congratulations to HCOG for their REAP 2 grant. And so, you know, just overall, there are definitely challenges and many things to work out in setting up a regional housing trust fund. Reaching agreement on the programs we want to fund, the income groups we want to target, the funding sources, and the government structure, and then codifying these into laws and enabling ordinances and memorandums of understanding, which must be then passed by each jurisdiction that's participating. That will not be easy. But we have solid models. We have a good plan. We have a good team. Local jurisdictions now have a match that they can contribute into a regional housing fund with the ability to use the PLHA funds. And we have initial support from planning and city management staff throughout the county. So no, it won't be easy, but taking it step by step, hiring consultants to walk us through decision points, starting small and growing our capacity bit by bit, I believe we as a community can accomplish it. With the understanding of the need for affordable housing now as high as it's ever been and across all sectors, the flexibility of the fund to meet local needs, the appeal of the state match, and the ability to therefore bring more affordable housing funds into the county, I believe it's a perfect time for Humboldt County to set up a regional housing trust fund. Back to you, Beth. Thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth. That always, her presentations always get me very enthusiastic about the trust fund possibility. So yeah, I want to bring it back to the board and kind of, just touch again on what we're talking about tonight. Again, one, I wanted to make sure that, as HCOG as a board, you're aware that these discussions are going on, that HCOG keeps coming up as a potential role as an administrator of this fund. Elizabeth talked about kind of these next steps, that funding, that other funding sources would take care of the next steps. So we wouldn't be putting HCOG money towards this effort. At this point, I would be participating as a stakeholder, kind of, as I have been kind of through REAP and other ways that we stay involved in housing efforts. So really the question is, should we continue on this path? Should we stay being considered? And then, additional decision touch points, they would all be coming back to not only this board, but as Elizabeth mentioned, to all of the jurisdictions. So there's plenty to decide on, but this is sort of the preliminary, taking the temperature. Is this where you want to be putting some effort and some consideration? So with that, I think we'd like to open it up for questions, and then after that, we can take public comment.
Well, thank you. There's a lot of information there. It sounds interesting, and it sounds like something that could be useful to help build housing stock. But does anybody board questions? Comments? Comment, yeah. Well, I was going to pull just after the board gets a chance to, and then we can do another comment after public comment. But go ahead.
Oh, thank you both for your presentations, and I'm on board, and I think it makes a lot of sense as was described on lots of levels, and we're going to be, as a board, reviewing our TOT funding, which we've increased in this last year, thanks to the voter support for that, and so it's a great time to be moving forward. In addition, our board did some polling recently of 600 registered voters to get a sense of where they were at on road revenues, and other issues. And the top items that came out of that polling, the things that were of the greatest concern for those 600 random selected voters, was homelessness, substance abuse and addiction, mental health service needs, and housing. So those were the top 4 items that came out of that polling data, which is very fresh. It was just done in October. And I think we all know those are really important issues in the community. So this is a pathway forward. I fully support it. And whenever we get through the whole thing, I'd be more than happy to make a motion, but somebody else may as well. So I'll leave it at that at this point.
Any other comment? Yes.
Yeah, I just wanted to add a little bit to the background. So I do attend a regional housing meeting on a weekly basis, and have been for a few years. And former Mayor Seaman was part of that group. And so having both of us, 2 HCOG members in that group, is also part of, why this was suggested that, maybe we could house that here. And so then we did invite Beth into our meetings, and so she kind of started coming to get a sense of things. So I do think it's a great idea, and that this would be a great place to house it. And so, thanks for your consideration.
Okay. Is there any public comment, either online or in the audience? Okay, well, yeah.
Good afternoon or good evening, whichever it is. My name is Kay Escarda, and I've been on the, 25 or 27 years ago, I was a board member of the founding of Humboldt Bay Housing Development Corporation. And since then, I've been on several housing boards, including serving now on the Housing Authority Board of Commissioners. And so going back to Humboldt Bay Housing Development Corporation, I really got interested in this trust fund, and it has lagged all these 25 years. I think that this kind of a thing really contributes a lot. We have a coordination between economic development, transportation, housing, all of these things kind of fold together. And this could really help in siting, which is always a huge problem, development where transportation is coordinated with it. And I think it's a really good thing that we could promote. And I love the idea of everybody being involved, all the different in the regional, because we can't do it on these little ones. It has to be a major coordinated event. And so I think any interest that you have in seeing this go forward would be a great thing. I hadn't planned on speaking, so this is just off the top of the head. So thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, you did.
Greg Foster, I'm Executive Director of the Redwood Region Economic Development Commission. And I just want to say that in 2015, our board, which is a joint powers authority of 19 members, put housing as their top issue that they wanted to address, which is really kind of new for an economic development agency. And as a result, and that was primarily a result of looking at workforce housing issues that we were hearing from our employers. So we're really supportive of this. I've worked a lot with Beth and Stacy and others on this issue for a while. We are a joint powers authority that runs a $13 million fund for the countywide, and with 50 plus organizations and businesses in our portfolio. And I can tell you that you do need that scale to make these things work on a portfolio basis. And so just from the economic efficiency, I think the regional approach is much better. Not to mention the fact that it's much more coordinated between and all the reasons that Elizabeth said. So I think that you can count on our board and our organization to keep supporting this. We're not interested in getting into the housing finance game. In fact, we can't use our funds for that. But I am looking forward to working a lot with Beth and others on advising on how to the fund, the benefits and the pratfalls and the challenges of running these kind of programs. But again, I think scale is important, and that's why you do these kind of things regionally so they can support themselves. REDEC is self-supporting on its loan program. We don't receive any other direct support. So everything you see us do, we do through the earnings that we get through our program. So anyway, I encourage you to move forward. Thanks.
Thank you. Any other in-house public comment? Darlene Spear, it looks like, online.
Hi, my name is Darlene Spoor from Arcata House Partnership, and we do affordable housing, and this would be life-changing for us. Having an opportunity where we can bring funds into the county, where any nonprofit affordable housing developer has an opportunity to access support of this kind. I really encourage you to consider this. I think it will be it will benefit our county in ways that we just don't even know yet. Thank you.
And thank you. And Colin Fisk.
Hello, Colin Fisk with CRTP, the Coalition for Responsible Transportation Priorities. Just wanted to briefly say that we support this idea, and I think HCOG is well positioned to support, well-sited and well-designed infill housing and make sure that it, is aligned with the region's housing and transportation goals. Thank you.
Thank you. And Latanya.
Hi, thank you for taking my comments. I just wanted to say, I think it's a good idea that there is a way to deal with the homeless problem in Northern California. The person who just spoke, she just laid out the way the program is funded, and I think it's really neat. It's a little bit above my head. When I can understand the term trust fund is a phrase that's used. My understanding of a trust fund is different than the way she explains it. but I think it's using that phrase because of the way it gets its funding, the sources that the funding comes from, and just like the speaker that was on a few minutes ago, that it's self-supporting, and I think it's a good idea. I think it's a win-win. I am for it, and I can't. One question I do have is the type of affordable housing. Would from what standpoint do the affordable housing? What are some examples? Are we talking about the housing on the north end of Eureka? I think it's a green housing complex on the north end of Eureka. It's a big, tall building. I can't remember the name of the building. Or is it something along the lines of housing that's closer to C Street near the police station, Eureka Police Station? There was a new housing complex that came up over around that area. Is it something like that? Or there's a housing complex that went up that was on the
Latonya, let me just, I can jump in here because I think we're back in the realm of lots of questions and we don't have all the answers to that. And again, happy to meet with you offline to discuss that. But I think we heard your comments related to being in favor of it, and we'll take those questions offline. And many of them are, we're not that far yet. We don't have any particular projects we're talking about this evening.
Thank you.
So, thank you. Does the board have any comments? Yes.
So I wanted to thank you, Elizabeth, for your presentation. And I appreciated what Supervisor Madrone talked about as well, as about, these 4 things that we're all working on in our community regionally, every day, all day, weekends, the whole thing. And so any opportunity to be able to move in that direction, I think, is critical to try. And I think this sounds like something that is going to make a huge difference in our city and region. And I love the regional approach. I think, if we did that on levels with the other 3 items that we have at hand, we would be in a lot better position. So again, thank you. I support this. And I'll let Supervisor Madrone make the motion.
Thank you. And did you have another comment?
I did have another brief comment. I think the questions about what kind of housing are very important. And as Beth said, that's stuff that's going to be worked on. But in Elizabeth's presentation, she covered a very wide gamut of things. And I think sometimes it's lost on the idea of preserving housing. And there have been CDBG grants that RCAA used to manage for years where you could get a small loan to rehab your house. And I lived in Blue Lake in the 1980s, and we were on welfare. I met Adeline back in that day, known her a long time. Thank you for all your service in Blue Lake. But it was a small $7,000 rehab grant that really helped lift my family out of poverty into a stabler place. And then we were able to move to another location, and we got another grant. But when we moved and sold our property, we paid back that entire grant. It was one of those loan forgiveness that if you stay there for 20 years, never had to make a payment, and it could be forgiven. Well, we ended up paying that back because it had lifted us up out of welfare, out of poverty, so to speak. And then when we got our second grant, the same thing happened, and it really stabilized our family from now into the future. And so sometimes it's not just the fact that we're holding on to housing, but it's also having a dramatic impact on low-income families and helping them to move off of welfare, which is a savings for taxpayers and the rest. So there are all kinds of amazing positive things that happen when we simply preserve housing and help people basically lift themselves up from where they're at currently to a much more stable place. So it is my pleasure to make a motion to move that the HCOG board directs staff to participate in exploring the formation of a regional housing trust fund for Humboldt County, including the possibility of HCOG administering the fund. So it's basically staff recommendation.
I would love to second that. Thank you.
So we have a motion and a second. And we'll take a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None? And the motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
And thank you, Beth. Yes.
And at this point, we will adjourn as the HCOG board and reconvene as the Policy Advisory Committee. And the first item of business is a public hearing to receive comments on unmet transit needs.
Good evening. Associate Planner Stevie Luther. I'll be giving the presentation this evening. So this item is the annual hearing on unmet transit needs, and the purpose is to hear from the public on any transit needs that are not being met in the region. We realize that there's a lot happening with public transit. There's some innovations occurring and just some general interest. So I took the opportunity to go to the jurisdictions and provide a presentation along with the annual hearing. So I've been to all of your jurisdictions last month, so some of this will be a repeat, but for the benefit of the public and others who may be listening tonight, and there is a little bit of new information as well. So to begin with, this is in accordance with the Transportation Development Act, the TDA funds, and administering the local transportation fund. And this is just an overview of the funding that has come through in previous fiscal years that is used for both public transit and non-transit streets and roads purposes. And looking at the annual ridership over the last 4 years, this just shows a large drop that occurred during COVID, and that ridership is increasing. In fiscal year 22-23, there were a total of 446,000 total one-way passenger trips on the Humboldt Transit Authority lines, including the Redwood Transit System, the Eureka Transit System, Southern Humboldt Intercity, the Willow Creek Intercity, as well as the Dial-A-Ride. And then looking at the Arcata and Mad River Transit System ridership, we saw a similar kind of pattern of dropping off during COVID and then starting to recover a little bit slower in Arcata, but nonetheless increasing. And then the city of Fortuna maintains a transit program for adults over 50, and this is their ridership numbers. They've seen a fairly large increase this year. So this is a little bit of information about the reasonable to meet criteria whenever we get an unmet transit need. Our Social Services Transportation Advisory Council looks through HCOG's adopted criteria to determine if it's reasonable to meet. We recently got a triennial performance audit, and they made some recommendations about how we could make a few adjustments to our reasonable to meet criteria. The SSTAC reviewed and those criteria and recommended that your board adopt revised TDA rules and guidelines. And those changes are fairly minor, but they would include, in addition, that an unmet need should have sufficient broad-based community support, which would mean that people likely to use the service on a routine basis would make a minimum of 2 requests during the UTN cycle. And the reason for that is just so that we know that there's like wider interest, and it, we wouldn't have to further analyze just a one-off type of request. And then there's also some direction to adjust the language in the TDA rules to look closer at estimated subsidy per passenger trip and passengers per vehicle hour. And that's already in our definitions, but we would just be making it more clear for staff that we would always do that additional analysis and help determine the viability of a new service. So we'll be coming back with a future agenda item to get that adopted. So these are just some of the performance measures that we traditionally look at. The fare box return ratio, the TDA rules require a 10% minimum. And we do look at the marginal fare box return ratio. So whatever the unmet need the new service requested is, we look at the fare box return ratio for just that new service. And that's a measure of the dollars collected through fares over the operating costs. And some other standards that we'll be exploring are the operating subsidy per passenger trip, which can kind of better measure the effectiveness of a service in terms of how many people are on the bus for how much it's costing to operate. And then another criteria is the passenger trips per vehicle service hour. We can see that in recent years. This is increasing for the HTA routes, and it measures the productivity in terms of how many riders are using a service. You can see that in Eureka, there are a higher number of riders per passenger hour, just reflecting the denser use and shorter distance to travel. So these are the performance criteria that will be analyzed in the future UTN reports. And moving into some of the information about new transit innovations, HTA is working on a brand update to Ride Humboldt, and you'll see that logo around on different buses and other HTA promotional services. Along with that, they have installed credit card readers on all their buses, and it allows you to tap to pay using a credit card. And they have some fare capping rates where if you transfer to a different line within 2 hours and use the same card to tap on, you'll only be charged a maximum of $2. There is also a regional pass for $50. And there's been a lot of talk about microtransit recently that HTA has been putting in a lot of work on. The Dial-A-Ride system is open to the public on a soft launch kind of trial pilot basis. There's a Ride Humboldt app, and the way it works is you can request the ride through the app. It is right now taking you just from existing bus stop to existing bus stop, but it can make that the time to travel a little shorter than waiting for the next fixed route line. And then also coming up, we'll have the McKinleyville microtransit for the grant that HCOG has been awarded. And just a few other new services that come about outside of this unmet transit needs process. So it's kind of reflecting that we hear the needs of the community and can make changes. So the city of Arcata started this green and gold service map to increase service frequency from Valley West to Cal Poly. And then the Yurok Tribe Transportation Department has started service again from Wichupec, Orleans to Wichupec to Hoopa. And then in January, HTA is on track to start the Redwood Coast Express route, which will be express from Eureka to Ukiah. And just to wrap up with a few of the known transit needs that we often hear are for more frequent service, for earlier and later service during weekdays to get to work on time. Last year, Sunday service on the Redwood Transit System, and later night service on Friday and Saturday, specifically between Arcata and Eureka. Those were found to be reasonable to meet, so we're working with HTA to fund those so that we can continue to fund LTF purposes. And then I like to conclude with just operational need for bus drivers and the people that are doing the driving. They've done a great job hiring some new folks, which is a prerequisite to having these new routes. So we do have an online survey that's open right now. We've gotten about 12 responses so far. Folks can go here and take that survey. It's open until December 31st, and then we'll close the comment period for this year. You can also call or email, and I look forward to hearing any comments tonight. Thank you.
And thank you. It's probably a little repetitive for you, but you do a good job.
Thank you.
It looks fresh and new each time. So at this time, we'll open the public hearing and receive any comments that may be online or in the audience. Yes, Colin.
Hi, I'll keep it brief. I wanted to make 2 points. One is that I just think, we hear the same basic comments over and over again every year. And I think Stevie sort of alluded to that, but, we need more frequent service. We need later service, earlier service 7 days a week. So I just think, the kind of basic things that we need are pretty well known, and the way to achieve those things is more investment in the transit system. And then I also just wanted to point out that, it's admirable to try to come up with standards by which we can prioritize the limited funding that we do have. If we held other transportation systems, such as roads, to analogous standards for subsidy per user and so forth, most of them would fail. So I just think it's important for us to keep that in mind as we look at transit systems. Thank you.
Thank you. And I believe LaTanya.
Thank you for taking my comment. It's about the transit system for the Eureka. And I know, as the person who just spoke before me mentioned about 7 day service, 7 days a week service, and longer hours. I'm just wondering if Eureka would consider increasing the amount of time that the buses would be on the road during the 5 day or the 6 day week. And when will we know when they'll be going to the 7 days a week and increasing the hours and expanding the routes and the frequency of the buses that are running daily? When will we know this?
Again, this is something that we do not have that information yet. The survey is not completed. The transit operators have not weighed in, and it is something that will come later. So I would just say, stay tuned for more information later, after the first of the year. So thank you.
Thank you.
Any other? Seeing none. We'll close the public hearing, and you've got your work cut out. Yes.
So I actually have a public comment from somebody, and I just wanted to give their needs. They talked a lot about similar to what you were talking about, frequency, but I feel like I need to say it for them. They talked a lot about frequency and microtransit being closer to the destination. This is someone that doesn't leave their house very often because it's very challenging for them. And so having the opportunity to, park your car somewhere and get on the microtransit and go somewhere would be one way, or just to have the microtransit be able to drop them off at specific locations. And there was the concern about Dial-A-Ride doing this just because of frequency and time. And, if you've ever worked with Dial-A-Ride, they're a great organization, but sometimes you do have to wait. And then, closer to the destination. And then the other thing that I thought was really interesting he brought forward was, doing this microtransit during the Christmas season to see how it all works out down in Old Town and downtown, and maybe even over to Henderson Center. in town here. So that may be something that we consider in the future as well. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thank you, everyone, for their comments and ideas. Yes.
Very exciting to see the numbers for Willow Creek, 28, 29% fair return. I believe that's what that was. It's a lifeblood for the Trinity Valley out there. And for those couple of years that KTNet was not able to operate due to COVID and other complications, was really difficult for that community. Wonderful that the tribes, both the Yurok and Hupa tribe, have stepped up to partner with HTA to provide that service all the way from Orleans again, which some people don't even know it's part of Humboldt County, but it is. It's way out there. And it's just great to see that ridership. I mean, it's a lifeblood for families that are sending their students in to Arcata High, for instance, and things like that. So just really great to see that. And I also agree with what Colin said about how sometimes those numbers don't really express well what the need is. And, you know, at our board, we've been doing some polling, as I said earlier, around various needs, including roads and transit. And sometimes the results have everything to do with how you ask the questions. And you end up with predictable results based on how you do that. It was pointed out that there are a whole lot more people who would ride transit if it was more available. So you can't, you know, some of the polling questions were like, well, do you use transit? And of course, a lot of people don't. But that doesn't tell the whole picture. And so as a board at the supervisors, we are going to be working on a ballot initiative for November. And we've had a lot of feedback that we need to include transit. I don't want to see the road measure fail. Our roads are in desperate need. We're going to talk about that later tonight a little bit more with the use tax, gas tax work that's going on. But we absolutely need to figure out how to do both in an appropriate way. And so I look forward to more discussions by this board as well as our board of supervisors and input from the community on how we do that. How do we accomplish a better transit system and also get more resources for our roads, both city and county, right? It's not just the county by any means. So thank you.
Thank you. Any other? Okay. We move on to public comment on non-agenda items. Items that are not on the agenda tonight, we can receive public comment on those. And LaTanya.
Thank you for taking my comment. I just wanted to say, speaking of transportation, I don't know if you know it or not, that I'm not in the Eureka area at the current time. I'm in the Buffalo area, and I'm looking to come back for a visit to take care of some business of mine there. And I was told that there is no Greyhound service to Eureka. And I think that's such a tragedy. Can someone tell me why did they discontinue the service, and if they're going to reinstate it, when? I think it's necessary to have that service. Also, I want to say, please do not eliminate the air service that you currently have. Because right now you do have air flights that fly into the Eureka, or is it Arcata, McKinleyville Airport. And I think I would like you to continue with the service, and please do not discontinue that service. It's necessary for people that want to come and visit Eureka area. It's very important to me.
Thank you. The airfare, the air service is not to be discontinued. And those are a lot of questions, but I think we have someone looking about the transit. Thank you.
Hi, LaTanya. Nice to see you. So it looks like, as I Googled to ride a bus back east, that they are running here. There is a Eureka bus stop. So maybe if you got online, that might help you out. Thanks.
Well, I wanted to catch a bus from Buffalo to Eureka, and they told me that there is no Greyhound service.
So you may have to Google it, but yeah, or you can email one of us and we can help you. Okay.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you so much.
And thank you thank you, Mayor Burgell. And at this time, we will close public comment. I don't see any others up there. And we will look at the consent calendar. We have 3 items: approval of the meeting record, the fiscal year 23-24 overall work program amendment, and the City of Blue Lake 23-24 LTF claim. Does anybody want to pull anything? Any comments? Any public comment on the consent calendar? Okay.
I would move approval of the consent calendar.
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Seeing none. We will move to action items and an amendment of the 2022 Regional Transportation Plan and adoption of the 2024 RTIP.
I'm not leaving. I'm just taking positions. I'm not running away. No. I just think it'll be more comfortable to give my presentation from the lectern so I can actually see all of you, not behind a computer screen. All right. So we had an exciting STIP year this year because we had money, and that's always a good thing to be able to figure out what to do with some resources. So let's see if I can figure out how to use this. So I want to start by just kind of covering the basics of what this STIP is, just kind of not go into it too deep, but kind of give a little bit of history, what it is, and how we've spent our money in the past before I go into what the TAC is recommending for this year. So the STIP is the State Transportation Improvement Plan, and it's actually made up of 2 items. One is the Interregional Transportation Improvement Program. That is done by Caltrans. So they asked for our opinion, but we don't have to prepare that document. The other piece is the Regional Transportation Improvement Program, and that's the piece the regions prepare. So every region in the state is preparing this, and HCOG, of course, is responsible for our region. The money comes from the state highway account. This is a 5-year program. It's kind of interesting because the cycles are 5 years, but every 2 years we kind of re-up. So this particular cycle, the 2024 STIP, will go through fiscal year 24-25 all the way through fiscal year 28-29. And the Regional Transportation Improvement Program that was included as a draft in your packet, that follows the approved template that is given to regions, to non-metropolitan planning organization regions. So the other MPO regions, their format looks quite different. But for smaller counties like ours, we're following the template. So if it seemed a little clunky, I'm not taking any of the blame for that because that's just the template. So the process that HCOG, or kind of the CTC and HCOG, go through, what we do is we get an estimate from the California Transportation Commission, and that estimate is based on a formula. It comes to us. It's kind of a combination of population and lane miles go into this complicated formula, and they figure out how much each region is going to get. Then once we get that, then HCOG issues a call for projects to all the TAC members. So we have on our TAC, we have all of the public works directors and the tribal transportation managers. Any of them are eligible to submit a project. And so then once we receive those projects, the TAC reviews them and they work collaboratively to make a recommendation to your board. And that's what that draft Regional Transportation Improvement Program you have in front of you, that was, the TAC has reviewed that in its entirety and recommended it unanimously for approval to your board. So, after the TAC does that, we prepare it. And then what we're asking for tonight is to have the approval of it and adoption of that document. And then we're required to submit it to the California Transportation Commission by December 15th. And then there will be CTC hearings starting in January. There's a couple of them. And then final decision happens in March of 2024. And then we're geared up for that start of fiscal year 24-25. So we have done some kind of a look back of what kind of history has been used, STIP funds have been used for locally here. And this is a kind of a compilation. We looked at years 2008 to 2022. The reasons for that those years to be included is really just kind of the STIP looked a little different before 2008. The format was different. It's a little harder to dive into those projects and kind of make all the data match up. So that's really kind of just a convenience reason for that cycle. But that's why I'm showing those years. But in thousands, you can see how much was spent there. I think what I want to highlight is really since 2008 and a little bit before, the main thing, one of the biggest things we've invested in is the highway safety, and that really is the Indianola project. So that ate up a lot of our STIP resources for a lot of years, and really ended up being certainly the single biggest investment in that time cycle. Trails in there, you see the 5%. That is related to that highways to the Indianola project because that is specifically went towards the Bay Trail. So that was all kind of conjoined. And then the other big item you see there is complete street projects. And so projects that are proposed in the STIP, they generally have multiple benefits. So it was a little bit difficult to say, well, was it a fix it first? Was it a maintenance project? Or was it a complete street project if it added a bike lane or sidewalks weren't there before? So I had to make some judgment calls when I did this analysis. And I really just tried to look at, kind of what kind of the main purpose or impetus of the project was. For example, if there was no pedestrian infrastructure in an area and then there was good pedestrian infrastructure, I called that a complete street project, even if it had other benefits as well. So it's not a perfect science, but I just kind of want to give that history of kind of where we've been spending our funds, what types of projects. And then prior funding by jurisdictions, you can kind of see the Caltrans there has a big chunk. And again, that's that Indianola project because that technically is on their system. County, you can kind of see, generally sort of matching population, not exactly, but you can kind of see how it gets divvied up. Tribes have received money in the past, although not often. I will say, this is just kind of for reference and for information, but it is not allowed in the STIP guidelines to divvy up our money. Like we can't say, proportionally by population, we want to give each city, kind of their share or the county their share. We need to do it based on need. So it's specifically disallowed to just say, can we just kind of divvy it up population wise? Not acceptable. Okay, so that brings us to the estimate we had this year. So this year, I want to break this down a little bit. The estimates come, and there's many pieces to them. So there is a target, and that is what they assume to be available in that 5-year time span. So this cycle, we had 9.2 million, about close to 9.3 that was available. Then there's this PPM. That comes to HCOG. This is planning, programming, and monitoring. So that helps us write the STIP, monitor the STIP, do other regional transportation planning. That's a 5% kind of cutout, and that's just kind of how it is. And so that money is 5% of whatever the overall target is for the cycle. And so that left us with available for projects this year with just over $9 million, or for this cycle, $9 million. Then there's this max target, and that is where they actually go out farther than the cycle. This would take us all the way out to fiscal year 31-32. They're saying that's what we're estimated to have until the end of 31-32. So we could kind of dip into the future, but we can't go above that max target. So we could have programmed more, but it would mean that 2 years from now would have less money available to put to use. So there were a lot of discussions at the TAC of whether we should go to that max target and program everything out now. And you'll see later in the presentation, we do go a little above the target, but well below the max. And I think the feeling was, we don't always know exactly what needs are going to come up, and we don't want to program us out for the next decade and not have any capacity to make changes or, take urgent projects on if they're needed. So what the CTC is expecting to see when they review the regional transportation improvement programs, the types of projects they're looking for are safety, complete streets, active transportation, rehabilitation projects are specifically allowed, and then they want to make sure that it's compatible with a regional transportation plan and that community engagement has occurred. And if you've read through the draft RTIP, you'll see there's a section in there about community engagement. There's several ways we can do community engagement. You can do it on kind of the project basis, which which is a lot of the projects that have come into the program this year. They had their own engagement prior to going through our process. But then this is also a community engagement process. We have the TAC, it's a notice public meeting. We have our board. So, all of these things are a chance for the public to get involved. So we document all of that in the draft RTIP. So then we have, again, the expectation for it to be compatible with our regional transportation plans. So that's VROOM 2022. And really the objectives we pull out of there that are related to the projects that go in the STIP, which are really capital projects for construction. Would the project lower vehicle miles traveled? Would it contribute to mode shift, meaning getting out of our cars and using active transportation? Would it improve access to essential destinations by walking and biking? Does it have fix it first benefits, which is really that road maintenance and rehabilitation? And then would it contribute to safety? So we're all going towards that vision zero deaths on our roadways. So this comes out of the Complete Streets project table that is in VROOM. And with every project that goes in there, we show which benefits would this have? So these are the ones that the TAC, when they're submitting their projects, they say, okay, these are among the benefits this project will have. And generally speaking, VROOM says that generally speaking, we expect projects that meet more of the objectives will become the top priorities in the region. And I think the reason it says generally is because just understanding that even, for example, a rehabilitation project could be really important, but it may not meet all the objectives. So there was that flexibility built in. There are challenges with our objectives, and we have received some criticism about them. I think, we don't include kind of the degree to which objectives are achieved. So if you click the box that says vehicle miles traveled are reduced because you provide, the project provides some type of active transportation component, we don't have a way to compare, well, how much are they reduced compared to a different project, or could they be reduced more? We don't have a good way to do that just yet. It doesn't rank objectives in terms of overall priorities. So they're kind of all treated equal, but we don't necessarily have guidance on, which of these objectives should receive the highest ranking. There are other policies in VROOM that definitely point us to, being very pro-active transportation, being very much concerned about safety, those kinds of concerns. So overall, I think, the kind of objectives we've boiled it down to are the key ones, but still there's not an internal ranking process in that way. And then it's easy to, potentially over or under report the benefits. Some of these projects are at very early stages of design, and we may not know if we were going to ask exactly, it's difficult to, vehicle miles traveled is a good one to talk about because it's very difficult to say how much a transportation standalone project would change that. It has a lot to do with the land use being developed around it. So, there's a lot of different factors depending on the location of the project that might influence this. And we've been pretty basic about how we've been collecting this information. So I think that, we're just recognizing that the criticisms we're receiving from some of the public speakers at the TAC are warranted, that it's not a perfect science and there's a lot more information we could be collecting. But to say that we would have easy access to that information is very difficult, and we could be creating a very high bar that might be difficult for projects to even get proposed under our STIP. We have looked at exploring a ranking program. So what we did with the TAC is kind of look at the overall funding of uses. So kind of those two charts I put up, kind of a broader look at that. And the TAC did hear public comments, and they discussed the process. We talked about what other COGs do in terms of ranking. Some have a ranking process. Some have a policy document about what kind of projects go in the STIP. Ultimately, the TAC is not recommending any formal ranking process at this time. I think really what I've heard from the TAC is that it's very difficult given our variety of jurisdictions, some very urban, some very rural, to come up with a ranking program that would feel equitable because rural roads and urban roads are not the same. And so that is something I heard loud and clear from the TAC members, is just a concern that we kind of create a very cumbersome process and make it difficult for certain projects to be competitive, even though they could be highly needed for our community. We do have a safe and sustainable transportation target. And this one's very specific, so kind of separate from the ranking program. This is in Vroom as it is today, and it says we're going to increase by 10% by 2023, which is now, and by 25% by 2028, the regional discretionary funding set aside for permanent infrastructure, pop-ups, pilots, and other projects for active transportation. So we know active transportation is a big focus of Vroom. And I think when I went to kind of analyze this, I think about some documentation about this in the staff report. It's a little bit difficult to really say where we're at with this because of the way we were collecting information on past STIP projects. We didn't necessarily know how much, like I said, projects have multiple benefits. So to say, exactly how much of that project cost went towards the active transportation component might be somewhat easy to tackle in terms of construction dollars, but when we talk about the earlier project phases like planning, permitting, environmental studies, it gets a little bit trickier to say what exactly of that would be devoted to, to the active transportation components. Does it even matter because that's not construction, so it's not really like getting us, infrastructure on the ground immediately. So I think there's a lot of nuances here that I would like to be able to dive into. What I would suggest, we did start collecting a little better information this year. So what I would suggest is we actually use this STIP cycle as the base year because we can start collecting the information in real time versus like a history activity of trying to go back and dissect the past projects and really pull out from budgets and things like that how much of a portion of a project was spent. It was a rabbit hole that could be somebody's full-time job, and I think maybe it's just cleaner to start fresh and use this year as baseline so we can move forward and make sure we have what we need to show that we're meeting this criteria. But just, for projects that had gone forward that had active transportation components. So it's not quite answering this question, but just what projects that came forward from that 2008 to 2022 era, there was about 43% of STIP funds were spent on projects that included significant complete street improvements. This round, it's closer to 82% of the funds that have projects that benefit mode shifts. So there is that increase, but again, it doesn't tell us kind of dollar for dollar what's going into the active transportation components of the project. So that brings us to the exciting part, which is the TAC recommendations for this cycle. So we're going to go through these projects. I'll try to keep it relatively brief on each one. But this is the suite of projects that the TAC recommended. And I will say that although there were a little bit of changes to maybe the phases that got funded on particular projects, all of the projects that were brought forward by the TAC members, we found a way to build into the recommended suite of projects. And there is a priority ranking. The STIP requires us to rank in priority because it is an estimate that they give us. And so in the event that funds would fall short, they want us to rank projects so that they would know kind of which projects would, and essentially they don't fall off the list, they get delayed to future cycles. And so we don't have to necessarily rank like 1 through 8 because we have 8 projects. We can put them in buckets. And so the methodology we used here was really looking at a combination of, how many objectives in the regional transportation plan did they meet? So how many room objectives? Did the project leverage other funds? So for example, the Beta Zoo Trail is ranked number 1. They have over $9 million of other funds that are ready to go for that project. So we can really complete the Beta Zoo Trail, make it construction ready by adding the STIP infusion of dollars. So that's why that one came out on top, because it just like gets them where they need to be so quickly for a really important community project and regional important project. So then the others we looked at in that second priority, the interchange projects in Arcata and Fortuna, those are projects that have already started and gone through a first phase. So they're kind of like moving along in the project phasing. And so keeping the STIP funding going for those projects is important because it keeps the projects moving forward. And as we'll learn, they're pretty important projects. Along those same line, the Redwood Drive Complete Streets project was ranked in that number 2 category, along with Myrtle Avenue improvements, which is a lot of bike lane improvements on Myrtle Avenue. Those all go into the second bucket because again, they meet a lot of our room objectives. And then with the Myrtle Avenue project, they're also bringing a lot of city funds to that. So again, that leveraging of funds. And then projects that, third kind of, just kind of have one RTP or one room objective, and that's primarily the fix it first or rehabilitation. And those were ranked the lowest. Hubbard Lane is the last one on the list, and we'll see a little more about that one. That one's not actually included in VROOM right now, so we need an amendment to include that. So that's kind of our lowest priority because it wasn't already kind of pre-put on the list. So we're going to just talk through a little bit of each project. I think Beta Zoo has been widely publicized, very exciting project with about 1.5 million of STIP funds. They can, my understanding is kind of make that project complete. It funds a little bit of all the phases because it's just kind of supplementing what they've already received in other funding sources. It meets several of the objectives: mode shift, reducing vehicle miles traveled, certainly safety improvements and access to essential destinations. The county's Redwood Drive Complete Street project. This would be a complete overhaul of Redwood Drive in Garberville, really focusing on, improving the downtown core. It has a lot of downtown revitalization components to it, in addition to being a complete street project, adding street trees, things like that. So it's, and I will say this is the project that got the most community input. At the TAC meeting, we had several organizations and individuals from Garberville present via Zoom at the TAC meeting, really supporting this project. The county did originally ask for all of the phases to be funded, which would have included construction. That brought the cost over $10 million once we include construction. So what the TAC landed on was including all the project phases through right-of-way. So it would be essentially construction ready. And they encouraged the county to look for other grant funds so that we don't have that big STIP hit of another about $8 million. But that there's nothing to preclude the county in a future STIP cycle, once they get that sort of construction ready status, to ask for those construction funds and be considered if they haven't had luck in a grant cycle. So that was the reasoning behind that. But I wanted to kind of explain that history because we did get a lot of public comments in support of this project. The Arcata Interchange, US 101, Sunset Interchange. This one, it's really a critical link between town and campus. When Don Burden was here, this was part of his walk audit, and he dubbed it the longest crosswalk he'd ever been on anywhere in the nation. It's a very dangerous and confusing intersection, so they'll be looking at improving that. A prior phase was funded in a prior STIP cycle, so they'll be doing the next two phases, which is the plan, specifications, engineering, and right-of-way, really getting it in that construction-ready status, which will make them eligible for a lot more funding. Kenmar and Fortuna, similar concept, doing roundabouts at the interchange. Fortuna has no safe pedestrian access from the Riverwalk area to the downtown and the rest of town's core. Both Kenmar and 12th Street, literally there's just no pedestrian facilities whatsoever. So there's no safe way to walk or bike to those areas. So there's a lot of great things about this project that will create that safe linkage. So it does contribute to mode shift, Vision Zero certainly, and promoting the access to essential destinations and linking Riverwalk and downtown. And similarly to the Arcata project, they had funding, prior STIP funding that did the earliest phase, and now we're looking for the next two project phases, getting it construction ready. And then Eureka's Myrtle project. Myrtle, it's 5th to Harrison, and that's going to be bike lane improvements and some other road rehabilitation. We'll just really kind of complete that area, kind of intersects a little bit with the Beta Zoo Trail, but I think it's really adding bike lanes where there aren't any and where it's very uncomfortable to be a pedestrian and cyclist. So this does contribute to many of the objectives, and they are looking for construction phase funding, and it really is just $600,000 because it's supplementing what the city is already putting in. So it's just, again, leveraging other funds. The county has put in for a Central Avenue surface rehabilitation and overlay. This is kind of the north end of Central Avenue from Grange to essentially the airport or north of the airport on the 101. This will be pavement rehabilitation, but it also has a bike lane included. So they're going to kind of shrink down the lanes a little bit, add bike lanes, which is great. Just kind of a note that came up during the TAC meetings. This is a route that many students going to Dow's Prairie School, they're riding their bicycles on. This is very unsafe. So getting that bike, a little buffer for them, will be important. And the county brought this project forward. Trinidad has Main Street, Patrick's Point Drive, and West Haven. This is really just a rehab project, but I will say prior phases of this project really did the pedestrian improvements. So they've been kind of going through very methodically through step cycle, getting the ADA access done. And this is kind of the last piece of that. So this would be really all through town pavement rehabilitation. And then finally, as I mentioned, the Hubbard Lane project for the county. This one does require an amendment to room to be included. It is a fix-it-first rehabilitation project. They will be studying including bike lanes as they move it forward. They're asking for the whole project to be funded. And they will also be looking at, as you see on the right-hand side where it says end project there, there's a barrier for transit to serve that area. There's been a lot of housing development on this road, and right now transit buses can't use the road because of a dip that's right there. So they are going to also be exploring correcting that and see if we can get some transit access. But that's still to be determined through those early stages of engineering. So the overall benefits of the suite of projects that the TAC has recommended for approval, we get that new Class 1 multi-use trail through the city of Eureka, which is the Beta Zoo Trail, leveraging a lot of funding for that. There's interchange improvements at 4 locations that would be improving safety and pedestrian access. We get 2.16 miles of new on-street bike lanes. We get over 3 miles of rehabilitated lane miles and over a mile of improved sidewalks. So the funding requested, it did go a little beyond our target. So we're about 1.2 million over, but of course, well below the max target. So what that means is next STIP cycle, 1.2 million of our dollars will already be accounted for. So we'll have a little less to divvy up, but we still will, judging by what they're targeting, showing as the max target, which is kind of an indication of future STIP cycles, we should still have programming capacity next cycle. So the action requested tonight is, of course, to ask any questions, take public comments, and then, one, to include the Hubbard Lane project, we would need to amend VROOM and then adopt the 2024 RTIP. And then the next steps after that, I will, make any recommended changes that you give me tonight, compile the final appendices that go with the document, and then submit the document to the CTC, before December 15th. And that's it for me.
We covered a lot of territory in a short time there.
I like to go fast,
And you did it. Well, we will open the public comment.
Okay.
But is there any? Yeah, I was just going to ask that.
Thanks for that great presentation. It was really exciting. So I just was curious. You said Myrtle Avenue improvement to Fifth to Harrison.
Mm-hmm.
So the bike lanes are being replaced because aren't there bike lanes there? Seems like I've ridden my bike there with my kids many times.
Okay, yeah, I may have misspoke. Yeah, if there's lanes there already, I think the idea is to increase the comfort and improve the dimensions.
Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and then will they be doing anything pedestrian as well? It
don't-
seems like it's all sidewalked. I mean, it's
I
pretty-
think it's all sidewalked. Yeah, so I think my understanding it's mainly the rehabilitation and the reconfiguration of the bike lanes.
Okay, and the rehabilitation mean repaving?
Mm-hmm.
Yes, good. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, so just to be clear, the reason, so the STIP will not cover routine maintenance. So if you're just kind of like overlaying existing pavement, that's not something the STIP will cover. But when we get to the point, like so many of our roads are, where they're actually failing, that's a rehabilitation project, and that can be funded through this STIP. So there is an important distinction there, but it is essentially repaving. But it's a bigger job than just sort of like a new overlay.
Dig outs.
Thank you.
Yeah, ask an engineer.
Yeah. Yes, Mayor Jones.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for the maps, especially in the packet, because I really like maps. Concerning the City of Arcata Sunset Avenue area there, and I traverse that quite a bit because I like to go to Cal Poly Humboldt basketball games. But I'm wondering when we can get some detail about what they're thinking, what the thinking is with reconfiguring that, because that is a very unusual intersection and very dangerous when you have students walking at night now when it's getting dark late earlier. And so I'm just really curious to see what the final ideas are on that.
Yeah, I think there's a couple ideas they are considering, generally all surrounding, different roundabout configurations. They do submit for every project that comes in and is proposed for the RTIP, we get a project study report, which has a higher level of detail than what we include in the kind of summary packet. So I can share that with you. You can see the designs that they're looking towards. I know they had a public meeting just a couple days ago, kind of, just kind of sharing those initial design ideas and more to come on that. I think they do want to get a lot of public input. As you mentioned, it's a very confusing intersection, and it's even, even the remedies still look complicated. But yeah, I think, they're still very much in those early stages taking in comments, but I can get you the details.
Thank you.
And Supervisor Madrone, I think, has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. First, thank you to staff and all the TAC members for all their hard work on this. And I'm always impressed how the TAC representing all these different cities in the county come to unanimous decisions almost always. That is just not common in government when you're fighting over limited resources, but they're not fighting. No. I mean, it seems to me, I've never been to one, but it seems to me they're all working really well to try and recognize all of the district's needs, all the different municipalities as well as the county, and that is to be applauded. So thank you for that work. One question and then another comment. $32 million between now and 2032 or so. So it's about 8 or 9 years, and we're going to use $10 million now, which leaves about $22 million for 9 years. And if I do the math, that's about $2.5 million a year. So this is a banner year. Thank you. It's nice to get some funding after all the interchange funding and everything else. But I'm hoping that'll go up, because that's just not a lot of money for all the needs. But it is what it is, and we're grateful to be having some new money coming to the table in that regard. So that's just a comment. And not really a clarification, but I did the math correctly, I think, right? So.
I think so. Yeah, it's not a lot. And I will say this is, there is some talk of it kind of being like one of the last great STIP cycles. And some of this will tie into the road charge discussion we're going to have later. So one thing that's happened that kind of bolstered this STIP cycle was the revenue from diesel fuel. So the revenue from diesel is a percent tax. And because of inflation, that's gone up very high. The revenue from the gas tax is a flat tax. It's a quarter per gallon. So that has gone down. But the diesel is compensating for that at this moment. That's not projected to continue. We're not going to have, hopefully, a runaway inflation indefinitely. So that's one of the challenges. But there's definitely, not great STIP cycles on the horizon, at least from what, kind of the projections are initially.
That's great. Thank you for that. And, I too look for some nice discussions later tonight and ongoing in regards to the gas tax, the use tax, and those efforts there. And I guess that's later in the agenda. One other comment, and that is when I first took office 5 years ago, I realized that Scenic Drive, which everybody uses, was not even on the list to be considered. And part of that was the county had not stepped up to say, we'll take on the project. And that's my understanding. You don't get any projects on the list unless there's a jurisdiction that's saying, we'll take on the project. So the county did change that 4 or 5 years ago. It is on the list now and has its ranking based on different things. A lot of people don't realize that's actually the California Coastal Trail. And when we think about mode shift and other kinds of things, it's so critical. And it really is our Pebble Beach Drive without toll stations on either end. But it is a nightmare. I mean, it is totally rehabable, but it's probably 30, 40 million. And I just discovered recently that when that road, which used to be Highway 1, before Highway 101 was built, after the 64 flood. And when that happened, Caltrans was in a bind. They were taking care of Highway 1, or Scenic Drive, and they were also building this brand new Highway 101. So they talked with the county and said, we need to transfer Highway 1 or Scenic Drive to the county. At that time, in 1967, there was an estimate of $13 million of needs at that time for repair on Scenic Drive, but we accepted it without any funding. So I'm very much looking forward to conversations with Caltrans and with the state legislature and our pro tem, Senator McGuire, about how Caltrans, the county, and other resources from the federal government through the highway infrastructure program can really bring Scenic Drive back into the majesty it deserves. It is an economic engine for that area, and it is just in horrible, horrible shape. Luckily, it's only 4 miles, but boy, it is a nightmare. So I'm going to be talking with my TAC representatives and others about really trying to at least get the initial phases of planning, engineering studies done, so then we can go after all those other monies and not try to get it all from HCOGS or STIP funding. But looking forward to that process. Glad it's on the list, and there's my little lobbying piece, I guess you might say, or a county project.
And if I could add to that, thank you for those comments. And in one of the sections of the draft RTIP, I do highlight that there's kind of a theme to a lot of these projects that are on the list. You know, they're interchange improvements where it's unsafe, where highways have divided our communities. They are, you know, in the case of Central and Garberville, Redwood Drive, those are old highways. So, you know, there's just kind of this reoccurring theme where we're sort of left with these legacies that are really beyond our local resources to fix. So I do highlight that in the report. I don't know where that lands, you know, out in there. We're going to do some more pointed sending that message. It sounds like, so we're going to be working towards that. But it is worth mentioning that you know, it's a, you know, even putting our resources towards Indianola for as many years as we did, you know, we really end up spending a lot of our local, what could be spent on our local infrastructure, you know, helping out the state system or the legacy state system.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other? Yes.
I'm going to add one thing that I'm kind of impressed with. As a biker, I've found 2 places that I've really had awful time with, and one of them is Central Avenue, the north area. In fact, I thought that may be the most unsafe place for a road bike to go at all, and I've been cussed out and flipped off quite a few times because you can't get off the road at all. So that's just thrilling to hear. And I understand that also the area around Jacoby Creek on Arcata Road is being fixed, and that's the other. I thought that was the most embarrassing road in Humboldt County for a biker and for anybody. And so, thank you. It's about time those 2 things get done, so we can be a little more likely to use those roads. Thank you.
And thank you. Looking up, I see we have Elaine Astrew for public comment.
Brendan's here from the
Good evening. Can you hear me?
I'll get him next.
Hello?
Yes, she can speak now. I'll get to our in-room comment in a moment.
Good evening. After observing and commenting on this RTIP process at the level of the TAC, I welcome this chance to share a few thoughts. From the beginning, we were looking at not enough funding available for our identified projects, especially with the 10-year backlog resulting from our support of the 101 Indianola Interchange project. At the same time, we were facing the urgent need to shift our local transportation priorities in a more sustainable direction. Given this set of challenges, the need to be selective about which projects we invest in seemed clear enough. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. While the stated goal of our RTP is VMT reduction, most of the funding in this RTIP goes in the other direction, toward moving more cars faster. We chose to spread available funds across all the projects that the TAC brought forward. Highway interchange improvements, even ones with bike ped facilities tacked on, will not lead to mode shift. That's what the research says about VMT. During this process, what I noticed is the TAC did not appear to take public feedback into consideration as the RTIP states it did. Members did not seem to know about research on how to actually reduce VMT. They seemed unaware of recent tools for measuring VMT. Now, I get it, change is hard. It's uncomfortable, it's uncertain. But right now, as I'm speaking, across the state, VMT is being quantified everywhere, down to the individual census tract level. Data is being gathered, a baseline is being created, and changes are easy to see. I can see the data from my desk at home. People who control the funding levers can see results. If the board decides to approve this RTIP, we're acting as if there can be a big gap between what we say and what we do, and no one will notice. I find that gap to be troubling because for all the hours of prep and discussion, the result will be that people in this community still need a car to get around. I also find it inappropriate because we're asking the taxpayers of California to subsidize our resistance to change. This result makes me wonder if some different backgrounds and skill sets are needed to move us forward on prioritization. This is a time when the status quo is dangerously irrelevant. We need to act strategically with courage. We need voices with a focus and interest in sustainability to help guide us through the transition. As board members, you are responsible for decisions and outcomes. Tasks can be delegated, but responsibility cannot. If the TAC is unable to support our collective priorities, despite credible and repeated feedback, something has to change. Thank you for this opportunity to comment.
Thank you. And we have a comment in the room.
Yes, good evening. Thank you, Chair Johnson and all HCOG board members. I am Brendan Bird. I'm the City Engineer and Public Works Director in the City of Fortuna, and I also currently act as the chair for the Technical Advisory Committee. First of all, I just want to again thank you for the time, and also thank Beth here for the excellent presentation she gave and all the support she provides during this process, both at the TAC level and at the HCOG board level. As the representative of the City of Fortuna, I would just really like to take this as a moment to kind of echo my support and the citizens of Fortuna's support for our project. We really see the Kenmar Interchange project being transformational for our community, both from bike ped, a safety, a vision zero, improving operations at an otherwise outdated and dangerous facility, and also really something to contribute toward our greater vision in Fortuna of providing for more ATP-related elements with tie-ins to the future Great Redwood Trail and tie-ins to the city's planned John Campbell Trail that would provide Class 1 facilities in an area and in a city really that doesn't have anything like that right now. So aside from that, I wanted to speak a little bit as a member of the TAC as well. And I really do want to go back to the sentiment that Board Member Madrone had mentioned a minute ago, which is, we're a very diverse county. We got a lot of diverse needs. And we always seem to find a way to come together at the TAC level and support each other, to recognize that we all have diverse needs, to recognize that it takes all sorts of different types of projects to deliver all the things that we need for our constituencies, our jurisdictions, whoever we are supporting, whoever we are representing, and whoever we are trying to make needed improvements for. So we really feel at the TAC level that we have presented a suite of projects that meets a lot of those needs and advances a lot of those goals, while also keeping a focus on the entirety of our maintenance needs, and as well as our capital improvement advancements in infrastructure, and kind of changing what's available to the users of our collective transportation systems. So with that, again, thank you very much for the time, and appreciate all of your consideration for our projects.
Thank you. And I believe Colin was next.
Hello again, Colin Fisk with CRTP. I want to start off by thanking staff for their hard work putting the document together, and note that CRTP supports several of the projects that are included. However, that being said, the projects really haven't been reviewed in an objective or consistent quantitative way to determine their contribution towards meeting our regional transportation goals. Instead, mostly the process has involved checking boxes that don't have any clear or consistent criteria, which have resulted in some problematic outcomes. For example, the information provided for some of the projects claims that they will both relieve congestion and reduce vehicle miles traveled, despite the fact that decades of research show that those two goals are mutually incompatible. Several also claim that they'll result in mode shift, while not really providing bike or pedestrian infrastructure that's low stress or comfortable enough that anyone except the most confident or desperate bicyclists or pedestrians will use them. There are also projects intended to improve safety, and hopefully will do that, but the descriptions don't provide sufficient information to judge or compare the extent of the safety improvements. I think it's important to remember that our transportation systems are deeply implicated in both the climate crisis and the street safety crisis, and consequently HCOG has adopted those ambitious, urgent targets in the Regional Transportation Plan. And just a few of those goals are to increase the percentage of trips made by non-car modes in the region to 30% by 2030, to double transit trips by 2025, to reduce vehicle miles traveled by 25% by 2030, and decrease traffic fatalities by 50% per year until we hit zero. So it's critical for our safety and our community's health and our climate that we meet the targets. And we're not going to meet them if we don't carefully prioritize the discretionary dollars we have and put them towards the projects with the biggest impacts and the best design. The RTIP is the biggest source of discretionary dollars that HCOG controls, and we desperately need to develop a ranking and prioritization system to ensure that we're maximizing the impact of the dollars on climate, safety, and health towards meeting the adopted goals. So again, I'm not saying that there aren't good projects in the proposed RTIP. There are, but it's just not clear that this set of projects collectively represents the biggest impact we could have with the funding, or that the projects themselves couldn't be better designed or improved to achieve those targets. So we're asking you to direct staff to develop an objective and data-driven system for ranking and prioritizing all discretionary funding so that we ensure we're spending our limited dollars on projects that will take us the furthest towards meeting the adopted and urgently necessary safe and sustainable transportation targets. Thank you.
Thank you. And I believe I heard in Beth's presentation that she is looking into ways to improve a ranking or develop a ranking system that is meaningful.
Yeah, I think that a couple of things that we're working towards. We'll be bringing forward again we've brought it to the tech. It's a funding consistency analysis. This was an item that came out of the financial element of VROOM, and it's to look back and see kind of what our impact has been and to decide if we need a ranking program moving forward. So we've kind of done that initial step with the tech. They've reviewed a draft. They've given me comments I need to incorporate and bring back. But within that, they were loud and clear. The tech is not supportive of a formal ranking program. I do think that there's a lot of RTP objectives that we need to do a better job of quantifying, and that is a process that we've been in, and it's a big job, and everything comes with a lot of decision points. So it's something we need to be thinking really critically about, and whether it's ranking for these projects or thinking about what we put our efforts towards when we're going after grants, things like that. I think we could be doing a better job of syncing all of that up. And in that way, we are in process of that. We are looking to kind of combine, some of the equity elements that are in the VROOM document, along with the safe and sustainable transportation targets, and figure out, how we can be meeting those. Some of those things are already happening. Getting that grant that we got for the level of traffic stress analysis. This is an analysis that'll be telling us how stressful it is essentially to be a pedestrian and cyclist, like on a street by street level, with ground truthing, for the greater Humboldt Bay region, which we're defining as basically from McKinleyville all the way down to Fortuna. So it covers most of our large cities. So having that information, for example, that would be something really tangible that we could start building it off. We could start layering that with other information to say, like, well, where could we get the most bang for our buck and add to connectivity? So we don't, at the HCOG level, we don't have that now, where we're actually like highlighting projects that we want to put on the list, or see like the delivery could really be most impactful. That's not a process we've gone through.
All right, thank you. We have LaTanya.
Thank you for taking my comments. I just wanted to say, as a person who walk around the area in Humboldt County, Eureka especially, I just wanted to know, in the improvements that's going to be made as far as the new sidewalks, are they also including lighting? I hope I have this correct, the mayor of Blue Lake mentioned about it getting darker now sooner now this time of the year, and lighting or being able to, for safety reasons, being able to have the new sidewalks lit so people can be safe walking to where they needed to get to. I mean, I'm just wondering because I noticed that when I was on the Gold Route in Eureka, yes, the buses were running during the day, but at night I was seeing there was not much lighting, street lights, and I can see that walking that could be a difficulty um, for safety, from a safety standpoint. And then secondly, I was asking is these new improvements that's going to be made throughout the region, are there in any way connected to the rail trail that was mentioned by Senator McGuire? The trail from Humboldt County to Southern California, I think it was. So I'm just wondering, is that also going to be tied into that?
I will let our executive director
Sure.
address that.
First off, on the lighting, sort of project by project, whether it's built into the design or not, some of these projects are not at the construction phase. So if lighting's to be considered, that's kind of a little bit further down the line. On the rail trail question and the Great Redwood Trail, I would say specifically the City of Fortuna's project actually does provide access to the Great Redwood Trail and intersects with that.
Thank you. And thank you, LaTanya. Is there any other public comment or board comments and questions? Seeing none, we will entertain a motion.
I would move that the PAC recommend the HCOG board approve Resolution 2323, amending the regional transportation plan to include the Hubbard Lane Rehabilitation Project, and approve Resolution 2324, adopting the 2024 Regional Transportation Improvement Program, and direct staff to submit the Regional Transportation Improvement Program plan to Caltrans and the California Transportation Commission.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay.
We have a plan.
We have a plan. And moving now to our second presentation with the road charge with Lauren Prahota of the California Department of Transportation.
Yep, I believe she's joined us on Zoom and is probably ready to go. Oh, I think she was there. Oh, there she is. All right, Lauren, you can take it away. Yeah.
Thank you. Am I allowed to share my screen?
Yes, you should be able to.
Okay, perfect. Let me go ahead and do that here just momentarily. Oh, that's not the right one. There we go. All right. Can we see that? Okay. All right.
We can see it. If it matters, you're not in presenter view.
Right, I'm not. Thank you. All right. Are we good there?
Yep, looks great.
Perfect. All right. Well, thank you so much for giving me some time in your evening. I know there's many busy agenda items you need to cover, but I just wanted to circle back with y'all. I've had the privilege of coming to the Humboldt area, both virtually and physically, a couple of times this year, just to keep you in the loop of what's going on as the state is investigating a potential opportunity of replacing the mechanism that we use to provide funding for our critical transportation projects, both at the state and local levels. And last time I was touching base with you all, we were talking about our upcoming pilot, our public-private roads pilot, that was focusing specifically on the impact to rural and tribal communities. Um, and looking for participants and trying to share information and see really what rural areas think about this idea, this new concept, and how it might fit uniquely into the priorities and unique lives of rural areas. So I'm coming back with just some initial takeaways as we have wrapped up our pilot in October, and so we're starting to analyze and everything. But I thought it would be a good time to give you guys an update on some of the things we've seen and heard from our outreach effort to rural areas. So first off, I will say, we had a goal of recruiting 500 participants statewide, both from rural areas and tribal areas, as well as some folks that we were partnering with in one of our tolling agencies in Southern California. We did not get there because it's a pretty hard thing to recruit in these areas of the state, and particularly with our outreach to the tribes. Many tribal leaders did not really want to support this idea or explore it with their time. So that did hit our recruitment, but that's okay. We continue to try to engage as much as possible, and we did get a good group of folks to participate in the pilot. You can kind of see here how they were spread around the state, and I will say Humboldt County definitely had one of the larger counties in terms of participation. So we're really glad to have that voice in there from the North Coast. This is just a snapshot of what one of the invoices that participants received money, just giving them a sense of what their bill might look like. They did not have to pay anything. This was just simulated, but this is what they received in their email to show them how many roads how many miles they'd driven on public roads, private roads, tribal roads, and what their associated road charge was minus any gas tax credits as an offset. And you could dig into it more deeply if you wanted to go into a trip by trip detail. As you can see, this is an example from one of the Caltrans employees who participated. You see the purple lines there, the trip that's on public roads, the green line, that's tribal land. And then you see a couple of pink lines down there, that's little sections that are on private roads. So if people really wanted to dig into the data, and they really could have the opportunity to do that. So we also did a lot of local government outreach. We went wherever we were invited, and that did tend to be more in the northern part of the state than the southern part of the state, but had the opportunity to visit most of these counties. Most of them, I think with the exception of Modoc, I did get physically to, whether to a board of supervisor meeting or other transportation related meeting. Really privileged to be in these communities and hear, kind of bring the idea of road charge directly to them, and to hear responses and engage on, okay, what might this look like as we explore this idea together. And kind of some of the high level takeaways from some of that feedback is an appreciation that there is a problem, that we do need to address as a state. The gas tax is not going to be a sustainable source of funding for a transportation system into the future, and so we do need to do something. And also an appreciation that the state recognizes that it's important that the rural voice be at the table as we develop a potential replacement. Couple of comments, as you can see on the slide, rural areas seem to really think that this new system should be applied only to alternative fuel vehicles, electric vehicles, leave the gas tax in place for existing gas-powered vehicles. That is an option that the state could pursue. So it was good to know their preference in the matter. A lot of expressed frustration about rural areas being overlooked and marginalized, not getting enough funding for roads. There were a number of counties that have a lot of tourist traffic, such as the areas around Yosemite or Tahoe, that had some interest in opening up the funding formulas to include VMT elements to kind of capture that tourist traffic and the impact to their roads. So that's not necessarily on the collection side, that's on the expenditure side, but it was a key point that they felt was important. Modoc County raised the concern that this will cause people to, in increasing numbers, not to register their vehicles, which has certain implications. So that was a point of concern. A lot of skepticism, distrust of government. Would the gas tax go away? Would it really be used on roads and bridges? Comment that our revenue would go farther if some of the prevailing wage requirements state requires were waived. And then concerns around privacy of why does the government need to know my mileage? Is it a step towards control and things like that? All important points. So we talked through, this is a slide that I showed to many boards of supervisors, just truly understanding the cost implication to rural drivers specifically. And this is an example of different types of vehicles we have in California and what they pay currently under the gas tax for the same amount of miles. And you can see there's quite a difference in what people are paying to use the system. And when we look at the research that we've done over the years, and many states have done, those folks at the end with the low efficiency vehicles that are paying the most tend to be in two groups. One, rural drivers, and two, those in disadvantaged communities. Because on average, these groups tend to drive those lower efficient vehicles. And so when we consider moving to a road charge, we see that everyone is now paying the same to drive the same number of miles. So that means that the electric vehicles that are currently not necessarily contributing in the same way to the system now are paying more, and those low efficiency vehicles, the cost is coming down for. So what that means potentially for rural drivers is that they would be paying less in taxes. Now, with the expressed preference that we heard of having an EV only system, that's what this looks like. So you do have the low end rising and more fairness coming in contribution from the high fuel efficiency vehicles, but you still do have the low efficiency vehicles paying significantly more. So these are just points to consider, as the state continues to discuss what this system should look like. The impact on residents and different groups of residents is very important to understand. We also did some extensive outreach to tribes, meeting with tribal chairmen's associations and as many avenues as we could think of to get participation and to engage and understand their issues. There's a lot of strong opposition from the tribes to this concept. They're concerned around the impact to tribal sovereignty of a state tax being applied to their residents. So exemptions, was a comment that they said, our members should be exempted from this tax. They also expressed a strong preference for EVs only, and frustration over funding levels, which has more of a federal level layer a lot of times than the rural funding issues, because tribes do get most of their funding from federal agreements, but that frustration exists there as well. You can see the quote here, giving a sense of how much a particular tribe receives to maintain the roads, which is not too much. So that's an important point of discussion for them. Another interesting point that arose was the potential effect on tribally owned gas stations. There are a number of those in the state, probably around 40-ish, and they do not collect the state gas tax because they are owned by their own sovereign nation. So they have a price advantage, and they use the revenue from these gas stations in many ways to support their own tribal government. So it is a critical funding source. So they are concerned that if the gas tax were to go away, that would have a negative impact on their revenue as tribes. So these are all really important points to raise, and we continue to have discussions with tribal leaders, making sure again that the tribal voice is at the table as we consider this transition, and we're continuing to work on what solutions might be for these. So next steps, we're working on the full analysis of the pilot results. These are just some initial tidbits to share with you. Doing some polling, some focus groups. We expect the final report to be out hopefully next summer. And then also next summer, the state will be looking to move to the pilot that the legislature directed us to do through SB 339, which will collect actual revenue from participants and test test that administrative collection process. So we'll hopefully be recruiting in late spring for participants. Again, love to have members from Humboldt County participating in that. We'll be sharing more information, at the time, but just wanted to give you a heads up that is coming. With this upcoming pilot, we hope to be wrapping up the state's research on this topic towards the end of next year, so that we will have explored the issues and questions and stakeholder discussions that we feel need to be in place, and at that point it becomes more of a political conversation. So with that, again, my contact information is here. All the information we have about our pilots and research and everything, again, is on our website, and always I encourage anyone interested to go there and explore the world of road charge across the nation, in which we have much information about what other states are doing there too. So with that, happy to take any questions. Thanks.
Well, thank you very much. And it's one of those tasks that's not easy to do, but needs to be done. And I think we do have a question already, Supervisor Madrone.
Thank you for once again coming and sharing your progress with us. We appreciated that initial presentation a while back. And at that one, I and others brought up the issue of how it looks like we're funding state highways pretty well, but rural roads simply are not. And so however we collect this money, I myself and I believe many rural county representatives are going to continue to ask this question, is how do we actually get to adequate funding for our local roads? None of us are saying we want the state highways to fall into the same pavement condition index that our county roads are, but we have a desperate need. And I think it's something like, the estimates are something like $90 billion of backlog on maintenance, just maintenance, not new construction, not capital improvement, but just taking care of what we have. 90 million for local roads, 90 billion with a B, and only 9 billion with a B for state highways. So that also adds a lot of credence to the fact that our local roads are not getting what we need to do this. So I didn't hear anything in your presentation regarding that. I do appreciate the comparison between the different mechanisms being considered, but I really hope that this issue of increasing funding for local roads gets on the radar on this program and process, and we figure out how we're going to make that change and that improvement. We have desperate needs in our communities for this funding. So I just wanted to once again share that. And I hope it makes it into the reports and the process about that local need. Thank you.
Thank you, Supervisor, for that comment. I think one of the encouraging things that will be happening in this next year, I don't know if you're aware, but SB 1121 required the California Transportation Commission to put together a needs assessment of the transportation system in California, both state and local. So the interim draft is out for review right now on the Commission's website. And I think it will serve an important role in particularly raising the issue of the needs in our rural areas. But I would really encourage you to engage with the CTC, particularly in that process, because my program is somewhat limited in scope in terms of researching the method, right? Not necessarily looking totally on the how the expenditures flow. They're currently set very clearly in state statute. We're trying to take in that input about everyone's input about what's important. So we are noting comments such as those you made, and we're trying to reflect that, and hopefully that will be also reflected in our report next summer. But I would also really encourage you to engage with that CTC report as well, because I think it'll be an important point for the legislature to receive that report about where the current needs of the system are.
Well, I appreciate that, and through the chair, excuse me. And I very much will try to continue to stay involved at the larger level on these issues. One of the other ones that's come up in rural areas is EMS services, emergency medical services. Unlike urban areas where there's a ton of EMS services everywhere, in rural counties we have miles and miles, hundreds of miles of state highways that don't fit within a particular fire district. Our fire districts are struggling like crazy just for volunteers. And we get a lot of accidents on these state highways that are outside of anybody's jurisdiction. And there's simply not the money there to provide not just the ambulance services, but the volunteer fire departments who arrive on the scene and help extract people 100 feet, 200 feet down the cliff from these roads. So that's another issue that keeps coming up in our rural communities, is the need for EMS services. And maybe there's a transient tax in this road charge process, whereby when they're transiting through these rural communities on state highways, there is a separate fee there to help provide these EMS services. So I realize, as you just said, it's outside of the study that you're doing, but any way we can bring forward that message is appreciated as well. Thank you.
Yes.
Just wanted to make a comment regarding that Senate Bill 1121 and the draft interim report that Laura mentioned. I have been participating in stakeholder workshops about that. The draft came out after our board packet was already posted, but it is during comment now. So I am reviewing it. There's a stakeholder comment meeting at the end of this month that I'll be participating in. So just to let you know that is on our radar, and it's a future agenda item for coming to your board to make sure we're making formal comments on that. And that also, in addition to HCOG comments, I would expect those to be amplified by folks like CalCog and also the North State Super Region. So we'll be kind of coordinating with our counterparts on a response to that as well.
Thank you. Any other? Yes, Council Member Atkins Salazar.
Hi, Lauren. I just had a quick question. I was wondering what the method was that you gathered the mileage. Was it self-reporting or through GPS?
Yeah, so excellent question. So for this particular pilot, we wanted to test one of the more high technology reporting options. We've tested a range over the course of the number of pilots that the state has done, from very low tech to high tech. But in this particular setting, what we wanted to do was to understand whether there was value to rural area drivers in having the differentiation between public and private roads. And to do that, you do need a GPS with location tracking. So that's how we were able to get, that breakout of number of miles privately, publicly, and on tribal land. So really looking forward. I haven't seen the feedback yet from our participants. Whether they found that was worthwhile, whether they had privacy concerns over it, whether they felt that they saved money over it, I don't know the answer to that yet. But that's what we were specifically trying to test on the technical side in this particular pilot.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. And any other? Well, seeing no more questions, we thank you for your presentation and filling in some of the gaps in our knowledge base, and look forward to hearing from you again next year.
Thank you so much for your time.
Can I speak to the lady?
There is no mechanism for public comment in this presentation. It's board only. And Councilmember Atkins Salazar had another question.
I just wanted to just address the board and let people know, if you didn't, that I do serve on that technical advisory committee, and it is really limited in scope with what we are talking about. But if you ever have questions and want to talk to me about that, I can give you the information that I do have. It's been very interesting, and there were some, they did some research, interviewing people just to find out their knowledge about gas tax and their willingness to convert. And it was really interesting to observe those. And I can just say that it's going to be a really heavy lift to try to change this system. People are extremely skeptical, and I just think it's going to be a pretty long process to get to that.
Well, thank you. And thank you, Lauren, again.
My pleasure.
Catch her name. I didn't get the lady's name who just spoke.
LaTanya, I'll make sure to email that to you. I'll email you all her contact information.
The one on the board with you right there.
Thank you. And at this time, by a motion, we will reconvene as the HCOG board and approve the PAC recommendations.
Motion to reconvene. Motion to reconvene.
Second.
And approve the PAC recommendations.
I'll second that.
And we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. So thank you for that, and we'll go to HCOG staff and PAC member reports and our executive director's report.
Right. Well, I really will spare you. Just thank you so much for this very long meeting tonight. Appreciate all the work we got done and all the direction you provided, and more to come. We'll have a short meeting next month, adjourning to a time certain. So more to come on that. But this is Debbie's second to the last meeting before her retirement, which next month's meeting will be the day before she's done. So yeah, just more information to come your way about that. But yeah, thank you so much for all your direction this evening.
And thank you. And our Caltrans report.
I don't have anything tonight. I knew it would be a long meeting.
Well, thank you. And any member reports, board members? None? Well, seeing that, we are adjourned.